Okay,
Approved.
approved. Hi, Christine.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very nice to meet you. I'm fine. It's unbearably hot here today, and it's the favorite day of the year, my favorite day of the year,
The longest one.
the longest one. I
Yep.
just love it, and yeah, it's incredibly hot here in Berlin. And so
Yeah.
I have the door open to the balcony, and I hope you won't hear the noise from the cars, but it's
No, it should be fine, especially with the headset, and it's nice. It's all good. Yeah, it's pretty warm here too. It's the
yeah.
summer season has kicked in, so
But you guys have AC, which we still don't really have here because like
yeah.
the the summers have been progressively getting hotter and hotter. That's what it seems like to me. I'm not a scientist. I don't have
Ah.
data, but
We can still make observations, so it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we just
exactly,
have to
exactly.
know that sometimes they're biased by our perception. Cognitive bias is a big thing. So as long as you recognize that, and that's good. You can make all the observations you want.
So Christine, you're Canadian, right?
Yes, yeah, French Canadian even.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
yes, yes. So was born and raised in Quebec City.
Hmm.
Spent half my life there, and now almost half my life here in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, Quebec City is really beautiful. It was interesting to me to visit to see how European it feels. It's
yeah.
really
Is it
strange
nice?
yeah, for
Yeah.
somebody like me who's been visiting the US quite a few times and Canada only a hand, maybe 3 4 times. It's super interesting. Like,
Yeah, it's the first colonized city, I think, in the whole North America officially. That
okay.
so and it's still a walled city. It's occupied by troops, even though there's no war and whatnot. You may have
Hmm.
noticed the fortress around.
Yes.
It's really beautiful. I love it. I love it,
Hmm.
and it's kind of a big homestead for prog rock. So I'm sure
Yeah.
you guys go there, and it's. I have so many friends, who just go, and it's a big rock place still
Yes.
today. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've already said, like, I don't feel like a scientist, even though some of the things I do are kind of research based. I would say. I would even say that my interest in music is research based. Like, I'm making albums to see, okay, what if I do this, or how will people react if I do this, and that's sort of like my interest. And but you're a scientist, and just for people to know, like I met you at a show, a Stickman show, I guess, and
Yes.
the Canyon Club,
Yes.
maybe.
Exactly. Yes. Canyon Club. Yeah.
And so we were then connected on Facebook, and at some, you know, I think quite a few years ago, then I saw you post about um, well, you know, uh, your research, and I
Yeah.
was surprised. I mean, it's because I mean, there are many reasons. So first of all, earthquakes, right? Like vibration of like maybe the biggest kind that we can experience as human
Music
beings.
of the earth. Music of the earth.
Exactly. And so so how did you get to where you are, and like how would you describe your journey? And you can be as detailed as you
Okay.
want.
Well, okay, so you ask a question that may take the whole interview, but so I'd say that the main reason I'm doing this is because I'm curious. I've always been curious about everything since I was a kid and so on. And the funny thing is, I really thought I would turn out to be a musician. That's what I like. That you see, I own a few instruments. I haven't played those now in more than a year, and most of them I haven't played at all really for 20 years, but I put them in my office last year. Maybe if I see them every day, I'll pick them up again. But I really thought that's what I would do, or even theater and stuff that's a little bit more creative. But at the same time, I
Mhm.
was always curious about everything. I like to learn and so on. And I was 14. I would go babysitting, and I brought psychology books from Piaget with me to read at night.
Mhm.
I'm just a geek at
Mhm.
heart. So,
Mhm.
so anyways, yeah, it's a very long journey, but I came to this because I don't like to do things that are repetitive. I like things that are always challenging and learning all the time.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because what I was always fascinated by music, so we connected through that, and it's really something that's really important to me. And music is both pleasurable and intellectual. You
Yeah.
know, I derive so much pleasure to listen to something and listen to every note of every instrument, and I get in a trance, and I get the pleasure in the frontal lobe here, the frontal cortex. I'm sure you know what I mean, but just this
Yeah.
strain of the brain. And I've
Mhm.
had that in math and in physics, and it happened.
Mhm.
But anyways, yeah. So I was always a big music into that, and I ended up quitting schools many times after high school because I was doing concert lighting, sound, all those things. That's how I earned a living for many years.
Mhm.
And the funny thing, again, because I'm curious and I like to challenge myself, I really wanted to do more music producing, like mixing and studio and all that. But then I was in college one day, and we had this kind of formation or training, and it was about lighting. So lighting's boring, but I'm gonna go. And I go, and then I discover all the opening of the how you can control emotions with colors and all that stuff. But what was the kicker for me is we had to climb up on a catwalk, and it was secured. It was in a theater, a permanent theater, so it's not moving. And I
Mhm.
froze. I was scared of heights.
Mhm.
And then I said, that's it, I'm gonna overcome this. And I completely switched and went into lighting. So it's really funny.
Wow.
And then discovered, and then after that, you know, I worked in arena shows, and you climb on the ladder rope like 40 feet in the air, and you're on a truss. And I overcame that, right? Anyways. So all throughout doing that, it's a very physical job. I was really tall and skinny, and I got injured my back a couple of times. I said, well, maybe I should go back to school. I went back to school, start again, and it was just always back and forth.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I must have started 5 different degrees in undergrad. I even made my own because I was not happy with the portfolio my university had. And it was approved by I don't know, the regent or whatever, the president of the university. It was approved. It's like I could go anyways. But through all that, I finally switched to do a degree in geological engineering,
Mhm.
because I really went through the book of courses, and I ruled out everything I didn't want to do. And there was something fascinating about geology, the time scale of everything, the science involved. There's a lot of thermodynamics, physics, and all that also, but it's also tangible. So, anyways, I did actually finish that degree. And some of my friends were, I thought we'd never finish a degree because I'm interested by everything. I'm
Yeah.
just interested by everything.
Mhm.
So did that, then I finished school. So I'm a kid, man, you can edit that out. It's a long
No, no,
story.
no, nothing's gonna get
Okay.
edited out. I think it's very important. Like what you're saying is, I think a lot of the motifs, and I can see some interesting things already.
Yeah, but the funny
Also
thing is,
parallels, also
yeah.
parallels.
Yes,
You
so
know.
it's interesting because I kind of tell that story with images and pictures when I meet a lot of student interns. I work for an earthquake research center. We have interns, and they always invite me to do the presentation because the kids, they don't know what they want to do. They're in the late teens, early 20s. They don't know, and they freak out. And I show them, hey, you don't have to follow like this path, right? And you can be
Mhm.
successful in academia even if you do all kinds of things. So
Mhm.
anyways, after my degree, then I ended up working with my ex-boyfriend at the time. We were running a publishing company for science books for college. And I was the editorial director, smart ass out of school. And the funny thing is some of the authors of the books had been my teachers. And
Mhm.
I was a student who didn't show up for class. And then a week after, oh, shoot, there was an exam last week. I'm sorry I missed it because I never went to class or not often. And they gave me a chance. Okay, well, come in the office tomorrow. You can do the exam. They were really nice. And now suddenly they show up and we're refreshing their books. Well, I think we should do this and that. It's awkward, right? And they were laughing. Yeah, but from you, I'm not surprised. It's like I was kind of proposing new directions for their books. And it was just really, anyways, it was yeah, I guess I'm a bit of a smartass. but it worked out. And then after that, I had an opportunity to move to California. I missed lighting. Every time I went to see a show, I had the big, you know, nostalgia, the pain of not being part of this anymore. At that time, I played music more. But, and so when I moved to LA, I said, okay, I'm going to go back to this. And that's what I'll do. And visa issues and all that, it's a bit tricky. So I ended up being a rental manager for a large lighting company here, because that was something that was transferable and so on. I did that for a couple of years, and then did rigging for a company distributing chain hoists for the West Coast, Canada, Mexico, troubleshooting, you know, setting up stuff in the shop. And then I had a really, really bad experience from my last employer. And I'm never somebody who burns bridges, but this one, it was, I think in 2002, I faxed in my resignation and I turned off my phone. I was in Vegas finishing with Paul McCartney, and I just, that's it. I'm out of here. And I take a sabbatical and I think about my life. And I was here in LA. Earthquakes, of course, are more prevalent and so on. And I thought about going back to grad school. So I shopped around for grad schools thinking, you know, you just go and they accept you, you know, if you have decent degrees. I didn't realize how competitive it was, but I just walked into it and I went to interview professors to see who I would like to work with. And it's like, oh yeah, I could go Caltech, could go there. And then I met my advisor at UCLA, and it was love at first sight professionally. It's funny because I still work with him and, you know, on projects and so on. And I said, okay, so I only applied to UCLA. Thinking that to me, it's a, you know, it's a formality. It's not. But anyways, so I ended up getting accepted. I was fully supported. I had scholarships from Canada as well. And then I did a master's and PhD in earthquake engineering. And I really, really focused. And for the first time of my life, I learned to study, because I'd been always, school was easy for me. And so I generally had good grades. I mean, I had close to 4.0 as an undergrad. Once I stopped doing shows and focused and studied a little bit, to me, honestly, studying, I remember I had a physics class and I didn't do any of the problems or the homeworks. And the exam was at 3:30 in the afternoon. I would go to the library at 8 in the morning and start reading and do the problems. And I really thought I worked hard. I really thought I studied because it's the most I had ever done. And I'm not a genius. I just I pick up easily. But anyways, long story, even more endless. I worked really hard in grad school, and it was very rewarding. And I love everything that I do. It's really fascinating. It's different every day. There's no repetition. In that sense, that's something I'm sure you can relate. You know, you create things. And for me, it's critical to always learn and be challenged. You know, and I've been doing that now for, I guess 15 years or so. I got my PhD in 2008, so I'm kind of a late bloomer. I came to grad school in my 30s already. So, but then it gave me great opportunities because I'm not shy. And my advisor, when he was invited to give talks different places, well, I don't have time, but I'll send my grad students. So I was suddenly an invited speaker at conferences, and you know, I was just thrown. And I thought all this was pretty standard, and it is in some ways. But I was very lucky because it just shipped me all over. I went to Greece, Japan, you know, Hong Kong, well, all kinds of places to give presentations. It was so cool, and yeah, so it's fascinating. It's interesting. But between you and me, I think I would be just as good studying neurological science or going back into sound, as long as there's something to learn, and create and challenge. And again, the pleasure you get here can happen from science or music or creative. So yeah, so that's how I got into it.
There's so many, and I hadn't realized there's so many parallels. You know, for me, this is a story I sometimes tell, but it's very appropriate. Now, when I was about to go to university, I had no idea what I would do, because like you said, like my grades were all good, actually super good. through the bank, you know, you couldn't tell, okay, he likes geography more than biology
No,
or
you're
something.
just good in every,
It was
yes.
good in everything. So I had no idea really. And so that's why I took a book and that had all the options in Germany, you know, and I went through it and no, I know what that is. I know what that is, blah, blah, blah. And the only one was psychology, where there were a couple of question marks. So how do you research in the field of psychology? What is an experiment? Blah, 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 these things. And so that's why I studied it. Not because I was thinking I wanted to do psychology. It was just because I didn't know what it was.
Oh,
So
that's so cool.
Yeah. And yeah, so I
psychology is fascinating. I mean, and it connects to neuroscience as well. It's not just you know, it's neurochemistry and all that. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, and it's a really wide field of study, and I think it really prepared me pretty well for life in general. You know, and at the, you know, on the side, or you could say like I was studying psychology on the side really, but I was doing music all the time, you know, and so I was really really happy because, you know, I didn't, you know, I was doing both. And yeah. So you know, so maybe like a very I'm sure it's not a stupid question, but so these vibrations that the earthquakes, well, and this is already like the question, I don't know how to ask it properly, right?
Okay,
like so the vibration comes from the tectonic plates moving, right? Probably, and rubbing or clashing, and the energy is put inside, and then you get tension. So and tell me.
I'm just so excited because half the time I often do small interviews here and there, webinars, but usually you have 2 minutes, so you have a soundbite. But finally, I can explain that earthquakes are frequency dependent to somebody who will get it right away.
Okay.
So yeah, plate tectonics is basically that, you know, the plates move on the. I'm going to simplify the Earth structure a lot, but there's a core super dense. There's stuff that's a little bit more liquid. There's stuff that we call ductile that is between liquid and solid, and the crust is kind of there. So let's imagine there's this liquid thing. And the crust itself is separated in those plate tectonics that we now take for granted. But even in the 80s, people didn't all agree with that. Well, some people still think the Earth is flat, but that's another story. But in the 60s, it's really became a big deal. And if you think about it, there's these plates that kind of accommodate, and the Earth is really a dynamic structure. It's always moving. And the leading theory on why this is happening is that in the liquid underneath, there's kind of like convection cells. And so the hot air moves up and it cools down by touching the crust and goes back down, and it creates those convection cells, a little bit like a conveyor belt. And that makes the plates move around the Earth. And this moving, then you have the plates, they have different types of friction. They can have a subduction where one goes underneath. The San Andreas for us is a transform fault, so it's more like this. Well, it's a boundary, and then you have all kinds of faults that accommodate this motion because the Earth is spherical and all that. But an earthquake happens that you have all those forces happening, okay, and eventually you exceed what we call the shear strength, the resistance of the interface, and it starts to break at a nucleation point. At one place, it's weaker, and the weakest point breaks. And then the stress transfer makes it so that there's a rupture. When people sometimes think of an earthquake as in one location, they know the epicenter is close or far to them, but they don't know what it means. But it's a full fault. And the larger the magnitude, the longer the fault. And it needs to have all that displacement to cause, you know, to cause the earthquakes. But what happens is like this displacement causes, of course, heat locally, damage, the material kind of bends and melts and whatnot. But the energy is released primarily by seismic waves. And that's basically, it shakes. It's like you put two rubber bands next to each other and they're going to generate this energy. And so for us, an earthquake is what we feel is these waves that travel from the rupture of the fault to our location. And the ground motions we feel are frequency dependent. And depending on the size of the earthquake, so the bigger the earthquake, the more you have low frequencies. Yeah. Smaller earthquakes are only high frequencies and so on. And then depending on the earth material that there is between the fault and you, it's going to attenuate more or less certain frequencies, right? So it's kind of like music. The bass, for example, is going to travel way farther, right? If you're near an arena, you walk away, suddenly you don't hear Marcus anymore, but you hear Tony.
Yes, exactly.
and Pat, you don't hear his hi-hats, but you hear his kick. So it's kind of this thing, and that's kind of what we study, how the attenuation happens for different frequencies and so on. And then certain locations can enter in resonance because of that shaking, and so you have a lot more shaking than for the same distance at another type of site because of the soils and all that. So that's kind of what's happening. Does that address your question? Or
yeah. And I mean the funny thing is, like, I have to say, you know, that all is also obvious to me as because you can basically build a model of it, right?
Yes.
Like you can build a model, and you can basically just I don't know. I mean, probably it's, you know, you cannot really make predictions based on a small scale model, but you have some idea what kind of forces are active and how they spread and stuff like that. But let me just tell you one experience of an earthquake that I had. I think 2011 or something, was in Freiburg, Germany. And it was very interesting because it was the first time I was kind of like, I really experienced one while I was awake. And so it was really interesting because it was as if the air was charged with tension. Like I could, before the bang came, right, that I heard, right, it was the air was electric. And I kind of picked up on that, and it was, and you know, like the way that the sound also was, the bang was as if you had a huge metal gate or door that was bent out of shape somehow, and then kind of like snapped back into place somehow. That was how I experienced that really short earthquake. Like, you know,
that's interesting. So the energy, the electricity in the air you described, it's actually, it happens in certain earthquakes, and there's a phenomenon. The first time I heard about it, I thought it was a hoax. Earthquake lights. Sometimes there's lights that flash just before an earthquake because there's just charge. I mean, it's a lot of it's electrostatic stuff, but it doesn't happen all the time. So it's possible that you've witnessed that for that event, but it's usually for a larger event that there's enough to be felt or seen or something like that. But it's a phenomenon that's been described and is real, but it seems a bit esoteric, but it's real.
But I don't think so, really, because like it is very much a physical presence, right? And like maybe some people can feel it, others can't. I don't know.
No, that's true. And it's funny because I'm almost an earthquake early warning system myself, because I'm super jumpy, right? There's a small noise. And earthquakes, you'll get a kick out of this. Let me explain something else. Is Professor putting the professor hat, but I think you'll get a kick. So there's different types of waves, right? But let's focus on the two main ones. When there's the earthquake occurs, there's the compressional waves that come. These are like sound waves. So I'm gonna imagine you have a slinky. It propagates like that, and it propagates in the direction of propagation. It stretches and so on. These travel super fast. And then the ones that, so sometimes you're gonna feel like a bang, or sometimes I hear it's like a truck hit a house, and then my instinct is to count right away. And I'll tell you why in a second, because the waves that follow that cause the damage, they're shear waves. And again, if you think of the slinky, then it shakes perpendicular to the wave propagation direction, and it has a lot larger amplitudes. Okay, they shear the material as they go, and there's difference can tell you a little bit the distance of the earthquake. So whenever I feel an earthquake, first, usually I scream. If I'm asleep, I scream and wake up, and then I start counting. 1, 2, 3, and it's about 8 to 10 kilometers a second. Tells you the distance. So it's, yeah, I know, I geek out instantly.
No, it's like thunder and lightning, right? You can
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the example I use all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's automatic. So it seems yours, you were probably very close to it. If you only, and small earthquakes are short duration. So the larger the earthquake, the longer the duration as well. So it's all these different things. And so that's the one earthquake you felt?
Yeah. Yeah. I know that there was one closer to my home when I was a teen, but I slept through it. And in the morning, like, my parents told me that, some paintings fell off the wall and stuff, but I didn't. I was sleeping.
Paintings fell off the wall.
I don't know. I don't know. It wasn't. Probably not. But but they felt it. Like my father felt it.
Wow.
I did. No, it's like I live in a place where there's very few activity like that. But I lived in the Alps for a while, for almost 10 years. I never experienced anything there either. So.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's interesting, and it's so.
Well, you know what? I forgot I was in Japan a few times, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago there was one, like, shaking, like a 27th floor shake or something, which was very scary. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, if you're at 27th floor, it amplifies the low frequencies, right? You get into resonance. You don't need a lot of shaking at the base to amplify that. So that's why you kind of design things for that. But yeah, it's interesting, and you have no power when it happens. It's shaking. There's nothing you can do. And then you realize the energy that's in the earth and how tiny we are, little things, running around like dust on the crust. It's
it's an incredible. I can imagine, like people who go, like, who are on ships on at sea, maybe they have some sort of experience of the powers of nature, that that you feel small and stuff. But like people living in cities, driving with their cars, you still feel like you have power over nature, because you can go from A to B more quickly than any other being, right? But yeah, so California, kind of an obvious place to be, I guess. For
well, since I was
research.
there, exactly. But the funny thing is, though, I spent about 8 years developing, not alone. I had a team of about the 80 best researchers in the US working with me, but I was what's called a technical integrator, a team lead for that. And we focused on everything east of the Rockies. So all the continental, central, eastern US and Canada. And it's much harder to come up with ground motion models for an area where you don't have a lot of data. So it was a very challenging process. And one big thing that we do all the time is, and it's critical for what we do, is quantifying the uncertainties on whatever kind of prediction measure we use. And when I say prediction, it's not predicting the earthquake, is predicting the consequence of an earthquake given that there's one, right? It's called a conditional probability. So if we have a magnitude 6 on that fault and I'm here, what shaking can I expect, and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what we do. But if we can reduce the uncertainty, we can really save a lot of money, be safer, and design better, and so on. So I think that for the rest of my career, and potentially for several generations following, the key is to reduce the uncertainties. We know big picture effects. We understand a lot of the big picture things. There's so much we don't understand. So we understand enough to make the world safer, but we could do so much better with less resources if we knew more. So there's a lot of modeling that happens, and you were referring to models. So some people sometimes do these studies in the lab. So it's physical models. most of what we do at my research center, and an effort I'm involved in a lot, is using supercomputers, or we call them high performance computers, HPCs, to run these models. So we try to have the best physics models for the rupture itself, how the waves propagate, they get amplified, and all that stuff. And then we validate these ground motions based on past observations. But right now, we don't have a recording for a magnitude 7.5 on the center. Have the things we need to design for.
Yeah, yeah. You know, like the computational prediction. Let's say, it's just because I'm not a specialist, let's say, but I guess you're dealing with like models that include like multiple levels of feedback that you have to take into account, because like just it's resonances, right? So it's not that you can just calculate it once. You have to, like, you know, things have to be in German the word is Resonanzkatastrophe, so it's the resonance catastrophe, right? So if you know, and so these, would you say that these models are kind of like accurate enough to
a certain extent, but at low frequencies right now? So and it's funny because let's talk about frequencies for a second, because for a musician, you care about maybe 20 hertz to 20,000 if you have young listeners, and maybe 12,000 for older listeners.
Yeah.
For us, what we call a high frequency is anything above 20 hertz, right? So it's completely different scale. But where was I going with that? Yeah, so the thing is that even with these largest HPCs, high performance computers, we're limited into the resolution of what we can deal with. And that's because earthquakes are multi-scale. To have a magnitude 7 or larger, you need hundreds of kilometers of ruptures. So suddenly your model is huge. But then to try to replicate and simulate the high frequencies, you need a model size that's maybe a meter by a meter. Well, that's not tractable. So you use multi-scale models and all that stuff. And then there's so much information about the crust we don't know. So we use the best models we can. So we're constantly updating these things and trying to find where's the largest uncertainty. So that's kind of the research we do. Where's the largest uncertainty that if we do some more work, we can reduce? And then we put that in the model. And then we check that the model replicates recorded data better than the previous one that was simple. So that's kind of iterative process like that.
Yeah.
And these codes are extremely complicated. I don't run them myself. I kind of oversee how we get the allocations on these supercomputers. I actually just submitted Friday a very large supercomputing allocation. And the codes are very complex. And it's not like you can take your code on a Mac and you buy a new Mac, you put it on another one. They need to be rewritten from scratch because the computer systems, its own way to connect and we use them in a way that we can have like thousands of processors, thousands of nodes, which is there are multi-processors, CPUs and GPUs and all that stuff, need to work together to solve the same problem. They need to connect, they need to be efficient. It's a massive undertaking. So to be able to achieve what we do in earthquake scientific research, we need to work with computer scientists. And again, the lifespan of a supercomputer is 5 years. Sometimes it can stretch to 8. So you're constantly having to switch system. That's very, very difficult and demanding. So it's not just the physics, it's how you code the physics to make it work. That's a big challenge. It's really a big challenge.
Yes.
But it's, so yes, I guess the question was, do these models work? In big picture, yeah, they tend to work. And where we don't have what we want to do really, and what I care about, because I come from the engineering background, even though I work at a seismology center, is that what can we model, and where in the range where we have data, a certain magnitude distance where we have data, can we replicate that? And if we can replicate that, then we have to trust that beyond that, the physics included in the model is correct, so we can extrapolate. And then
Yes.
that's the way that we do a lot of simulations with the goal of extrapolating, so that where we don't have data, instead of doing a guess, having a guess, it's kind of constrained at least by some physics. So yeah, kind of stuff.
So can you tell me a little bit about how data is collected of tectonic plate movement? And I mean, do you guys literally place microphones in the ground, or like
Yes, well,
and how dense
yeah,
how dense is the network of the you know,
not dense enough. So
not
there's
dense?
different types of instruments. There's for a big scale motion of the Earth, it's more geodesy, we call the science that does that. You can have a lot of big GPSs and stations, permanent stations anchored in rock, and over time you can see the motion, right? Even if there's no earthquake, you can see that everything west of the San Andreas is moving north slowly, even though there's no earthquake yet. It's there's a vector there. So that's a kind of big scale satellite measurements and all that. When there's earthquakes themselves, the thing we use the most are seismometers. So these are really, I have one in my basement actually. It's a El Cheapo one, but and these record usually in along three axes, you know, 2 X, Y, and vertical. And they record the shaking as it happens, and it gets saved. And there's a lot of signal processing. It's funny because it's a little bit like music too. Signal processing, you do the Fourier transform, you look at the frequency, you need to filter. Our data is dirty compared to music. When you generate, you control it, unless you have an El Cheapo oscillator on your keyboard or whatnot. But so yeah, so we process that data. There's large databases, we analyze that, and we try to glean information. But in the US, I think the density of sensors is not great. Japan is great. They have a lot of big, large networks that cover broadband, so up to 100 hertz, sometimes more. And even arrays, they have arrays downhole. So they dig a borehole and they put sensors at depth as well. So now you better understand the site response. So yeah, so there's different ways to measure different types of phenomena, but those are the main ones that we use. Yeah.
Is there also a way to see movement from space, actually?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so we so from satellite images, you can compare pre and post event satellites, and you can see everything where it has moved. Really cool stuff. It's really fascinating. So we work a lot with people from NASA and the JPL. It's a center here called the Jet Propulsion Lab, and we don't do rocket science. We do our study of the Earth, but we team up with them because they have those capabilities and so on. And yeah, no, it's really fascinating. So that's tracked as well. There's a certain satellites like INSAR is a big one for that, for tracking motion.
Wow.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So you're basically like working with really like the biggest structures that are available to us, let's say, as human beings right now, right?
The Earth, yes.
The Earth.
Yes, exactly. And so yeah.
So, and I guess again, maybe a little bit naive, but
stop apologizing.
I guess no. But I guess in order, if you want to be like really really deep about this, you need to think globally, right? Like, because I don't know, like, because I have no idea what the magnitude, like really how that translates. But if you have a magnitude 7, let's say, like how far around the globe, let's say, can you measure the waves, you know, like
across the globe, for a 7 across the globe,
really
at very low again, it's going to be only the low frequencies, but yeah, there was a 7 trying to remember, in Alaska just a few months ago, and I captured the peak in my basement, and I have a very cheap instrument. So yeah, you can, and of course the larger ones, for very large earthquakes like the Japan, you know, that caused the tsunami in 2010 and 9.1, 9.2. There's sensors catch up multiple ringing around the Earth. We don't feel them. It's way too low frequencies, but there's all that stuff. So there's a lot of remote sensing and really far field information. So, and to estimate the magnitude, you can estimate it from sensors around your site and so on, around the fault, but more and more we use global sensors, so worldwide, because it's the same network all the time, so it doesn't vary, and it's kind of reliable to estimate magnitude. And magnitude is just a measure of energy, and so
yeah,
it's the energy release. Yeah.
Yeah. So and how is it defined, magnitude?
So it's defined mathematically. I'm going to skip the details, but it's a relation that tells you. So if you know what a moment is? If you move something, you have a moment.
Yeah.
To have a shear, it's a moment. So it's moment magnitude, and that's based using some kind of strength of the crust value, the amount of slip, the area of the fault that was ruptured. That gives you roughly the magnitude. That's how we kind of do that. Okay. So I'm simplifying, and the magnitude is just a measure of the energy released by the rupture itself. But if you have a magnitude 7 and it's like super deep, or it's at deep in the interface of the subduction zone, because you're far away, you're not going to have the same impact. So magnitude relates to ground motions, but that's not the only thing. And oftentimes, even in LA, every time I do town hall meetings with people, whether it's a public or specialty groups and all that, so, well, my building is designed for magnitude 7. No, it's not. It's designed for a ground motion. It's not designed for a magnitude, it's designed for a ground motion. And in your case, the one that's most critical might be the 6.5 right under your building. That's how it's designed for. So it's not necessarily, don't design for magnitudes. So yeah. So yeah, magnitude is just a measure of the energy released in the earthquake. And in general, the larger the magnitude, the longer the duration, the stronger the ground shaking. But it's really what we observe at the surface that matters to us. And that's why there's another measure that's becoming used more and more popularly with sharing with the public the information, is the intensity. Because the intensity relates to things we can see. For us, it relates to a ground motion measure, PGA, which is the peak ground acceleration and so on. But to you, it is describable as I cannot stand up. All my the frames broke, my chimney broke, that my frames fell down, my foundation cracked. Things that you can observe that are correlated with ground motions. So that's, I think, something that's a bit more intuitive. Then the numbers, it's like, what does that mean, 1G? Well, it's the acceleration of gravity, but it's happening horizontally suddenly. So it's not easy to see. So
yeah, because I was also always wondering when I read about an earthquake and then they say it was like I don't know, 70 kilometers from, say, like city A, at I don't know, like 2,000 kilometers deep, right? So what I was always wondering was, like, because if we're talking about these big structures that collide and where the tension builds, how can you tell where in the structure the tension got released, right? Like, so are there like several layers basically, and
yes.
you know how many there are? And
so there's several layers, and think again of the globe, where you have instruments all over the globe. Okay, and so the simple way to define where it happened, where it started, is you have just 3 sensors and an earthquake somewhere. You're gonna know about the wave propagation speed. Imagine a sphere, and where the 3 spheres intersect, it's your hypocenter, or where it started. Now we gotta go. That's the simple idea to locate an earthquake. But then this is just the beginning. But if you have then the full time series of all the wiggles and the waves from around the globe, and knowing the Earth's crust, for example, that certain types of waves, so the shear waves, they don't travel through water. So if you're on a boat and there's a big earthquake, you're most likely not going to feel anything. Maybe you'll feel the bang at the beginning and you're not going to shake. The water doesn't transmit. It doesn't have any shear resistance. So if you take that inner part outside of the core that's liquid, all those shear waves are not transmitted to the sensors there. So we know the location and this and that and all that stuff. And then by kind of a complex set of triangulation, and each wave has its own phase. So the direct arrival is called a P, and then it's refracted, the PS and the PSP and the PP and all those different things. You can gather more information on where's the actual depth and this and that and the magnitude from all those different metrics. It's pretty cool. That's really more seismology. That's not even my field, but I'm a jack of all trades, so that's all good.
Yeah, you know, I'm only trying to come up with the questions that that other people may have about this. You know, what is so fascinating is that I guess, like, even if we were, as you were saying, like, you know, it's about the prediction, so that you can kind of like build, say, different kinds of buildings where, you know, okay, in this place there's probability, you know, of, you know, and then we have buildings there that can resist that kind of movement of the earth, right? But like, if we really wanted to yeah, like Bruce Willis style, right? We want to we want to stop an earthquake, like, you know, that is absolutely unthinkable. Let's just
no, it's not an option.
Yeah,
These are forces beyond what we can do or deal with.
Of course.
Yes.
But you know, Bruce
but
Willis,
it makes for a movie, you know. It's like, oh, the San Andreas, the movie came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Man, I laughed the whole time. I was laughing. It was so funny. There was just so many inconsistencies, but you expect it. Come on, it's, you know, it's a big Hollywood thing, and even the helicopters didn't behave like real helicopters. Everything was funny. And I went to see this in 3D IMAX, and I was trying to be discreet, but I was crying from laughter, and the people around me, they were scared and freaking out, and they're just crying. It's like, it was really funny, but entertaining. Yeah.
You know, there was a time during COVID where I was starting to watch chiropractor videos on YouTube, and just like thinking about how somebody would crack the earth, like, with the elbow, just to make the tension go away, you know.
Yeah, you're gonna need big big hands.
Yeah.
But so, you know, there's I was thinking what questions we get asked often. I mean, people just, there's so many myths about earthquakes. Like, the one that I hear probably the most is like, oh, my building was designed to code, so I'm safe. Okay, code from what year? There were building codes in 1933. And knowledge was limited, right? And in the 70s and all those different years, and there were construction practices that were changed over time. So yeah, building to code, but the building code changes, so that's one thing. And the other thing, people think also that if their building is built to code, is gonna resist an earthquake and everything's gonna be fine. That's not the case. The building code's goal is to prevent loss of life through collapse. But it may be that your building is so damaged, you can't re-enter, you cannot use it. So you have downtime, we call it, you know, loss of usage and all that. So yeah, you didn't die, but maybe your house slid off the foundation, and, you know, it's a loss, you know. So there's different, I think, a misconception that people think the building code does everything. It doesn't. So you know, you have to be vigilant. When I bought my house here, it was built in the 30s. I'm lucky there was no earthquake damage to it. I went and inspected everything, the foundation, but in these days they built a spread footing of concrete, and then they built the house and rested on it. What happens during an earthquake? Slides off. Once it's slid off, what can you do? Nothing. You tear it down. So that's the first thing I did, an earthquake retrofit. So they put plates, they reinforce, they attach the house to the foundation, stuff like that. So Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do to help yourself. Those are called retrofits. So even buildings that were built with old building codes, now if we know they have a deficiency that has been since fixed, then you can go and retrofit and fix that so that you're better prepared. So, but we haven't had a big earthquake. That's not true. Let me rephrase, because I was actually 12 kilometers away from a 7.2 2 years ago, right about this time. It was my biggest, and it shook a lot. But we haven't had a big earthquake near a large population area since 1994 in California. After that was 1989, before that 1971. So people get complacent and say, well, I've lived through earthquakes, nothing. Yeah, you lived through one or two or three. Each of them is different. What if, so I'm not for making people scared. It's not the point. It's just you cannot be complacent. And earthquakes occur over a period of time, geological time scales that we cannot grasp, right? Everything is different. The time scale is different. So anyways, yeah.
And I mean, like just knowing about, I'm working a lot with feedback systems in my music, for example, and I'm pretty much aware that, like, say one moment where you're not controlling the system can lead to an explosion that is, like, a multitude higher than you would have expected.
Yes, it just builds up, it gets into resonance, and
exactly,
that's it.
Yeah,
that's what a feedback is resonance, right?
Exactly. And so that's why I'm kind of like thinking, and but like if we're dealing, or if you're like dealing with probabilities, where people need to understand that you can only always give an indication of what the probability may be for when something may happen, or what the magnitude of it will be. There's still a chance that it's maybe not as devastating as predicted, or it could be much more devastating, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the uncertainty we're trying to control.
Yes.
And the thing that's kind of difficult, the way things are, we function in a probabilistic world. So, and most of the population really doesn't understand probability. So how do you explain that without, people think that the 100-year return period means that something happens every 100 years. It's not quite that. So it's just, it's just, so sometimes there's a lot of, I think, the communication of science, so it's useful, because you don't want to scare people. If you scare them, you paralyze them. But you don't want to make it, again, the complacence is really important. So you want to scare them just enough that they're triggered into action and they realize it's serious. And a small investment of time and money maybe can protect them. And I think it works better probably if you talk to people about their families, their own little home, and it needs to be relatable. So that's a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So you work at the earthquake center, right?
Yeah, Southern California Earthquake Center.
Yeah. So how does your institution communicate the findings, and is there, like, what are the channels?
So there's multiple channels for different things. So for the scientific research, we communicate, of course, through papers. We go to conferences and so on. And that's the thing. Usually I travel a lot. And this pandemic, although devastating for a lot of people, for me was like, I'm not in the airport every week. It's like, although there are things I miss about that, but yeah. And then, so a lot of that is done more in the scientific world, but we have a very strong group that's called Communication, Education, and Outreach, CEO, and they're really good at communicating to the general public. And I don't know, in Germany, it's probably not a big deal, but there's an earthquake drill called Shakeout, and that's from my center. And the last couple of years, 65 million people around the world participated in the Shakeout. So it's an earthquake drill, preparedness, emergency services do their training. Everybody drops cover and hold down and go under the desk and all that. So it's kind of, this is done through multiple countries, and it helps keep earthquakes in the forefront, reminds people to prepare their earthquake kit, having supplies, a communication plan for the family, and so on. And I think this is probably one of the best things you can do for the general public. And they're also developing new ways to communicate that, like in terms of intensity, as I mentioned earlier, so it's more relatable to people, so they can enable them to be a little bit more resilient during those earthquakes.
Yeah, I guess like what you said earlier, it's a fine line of you know, getting people to panic versus being prepared, let's say.
Get triggered
right?
into action versus, this is so big, I don't know what to do, I can't control anything, I'll just, you know. So that, yeah, that's the thing. And some things are low cost. I mean, it's just thinking ahead, having water, you know. In LA, if we get a big earthquake on the San Andreas, we might lose water for 3 to 6 months.
Yes.
You're talking about, I mean, 20 million people without water.
Yes.
For that time. How is that, you know? So it's a real threat. And so having water, I always have some water in my car. And since I built a pool in my yard, I have lots of water now. But before that, I kept extra water. Yeah.
But there you go. Even that little bit of information can make people so scared, you know, like if you just go out there and say, okay, if we have a big earthquake, there's not going to be water for 6 months. You don't want to, you don't really, I could be, I know, but you know, it's very thinkable.
But so, you should plan for at least 3-4 days for your whole household. And then at least it gives you a chance to have, you know, to go away. I don't wait until my gas tank is at a quarter to refill, you know. I have a gas grill and I buy 3 propane tanks, because first, in the middle of a meal with friends, it sucks when you run out. But second, if there was an earthquake, we lose power and whatnot, I'll just cook everything burnt to a crisp with my thing. I'll use it to boil my water. It's just little things, and these are not the most common things to do necessarily, but that's, for me, it makes sense. So I do those things. But it's just there's a lot of things that are not very high cost, and just planning, thinking, having a gas shut-off valve. One big risk of earthquakes is it shakes, but it breaks the gas connections.
Yes.
And then if you have a break of a water main, you can't extinguish, and you have a fire, and suddenly you have, you know, massive fires. But if you have a gas shut-off valve at the entry to your house, when it shakes, it's very simple. It's a little ball that it shakes and it falls and it blocks.
Yeah.
And then, you know, first thing I did when I moved into this house, I kicked it to see, oh, okay, it worked. Then I reset, and well, I'm a geek too, right? So, but you want to check your stuff, you know, and I know it works. So, okay, so if there's an earthquake, and that's the first thing I'll go do, check if there's a large shaking. I'm going to go check and make sure it's off. But things like that, being able to turn off your water, these are not all difficult things to do, you know. And there's a lot that can be done to be prepared. I don't have a frame above my bed. I'll never have one. I don't want to die because I have a piece of art framed with anti-reflection glass. You know? It's like not worth it. So nothing above the bed. No way. No way. It's just, you know.
So let's go back to a larger scale, right? So if we're also talking about music, waveforms, and we also can talk about patterns, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in, like, if you're looking at like the global, quakes, right, and how they are measured, is there something like what I would call like a domino effect or something like that you get, like, you know what I mean? So there's so that these
so it's interesting because there's 2 things that play against each other. If I have a large earthquake on that fault, I released all the stress on that fault right there. So I'm going to have aftershocks because little bits of the fault have locked again and they're not fully adjusted, and there's kind of all kinds of roughness and not all that. So I have a lot of aftershocks. But then by releasing the stress there, maybe I put more stress in the other fault next door, right? And this one is going to be happy and triggered. So it's this idea that what we call elastic rebound. You have a big earthquake, and until you have the next earthquake, you need to rebuild the stress, rebuild the stress, and then you break again. That's the elastic rebound. And I'm explaining very simply, but the counterpart to that is that earthquake triggering. Because you have an earthquake in one location, you overstress another part, and then you can have more. And so, and we've seen oftentimes earthquakes. So you have a large one, then the probability of large magnitudes and the intensity of the events decreases over time, kind of almost a log scale. But you can have a big one after that. So 2019 on July 4th, we had a 6.4, and of course, it shook, and I started counting. It's like, and then it started shaking. Wow, that was far. So it was 120 miles away, Ridgecrest. And so then we geared up to go out in the field and all that. In the morning, I had a TV interview, which I hate to do, but I did. So full on makeup. Then I go out in the field like full makeup.
I think I saw that.
Oh, really? So it was funny. It's like, let's go out in the field, and it's like I'm like, washing in the washroom there. But we got there, and then we start to look where we're gonna go and do measurements the next day and so on. I'm with the team, and we go back to our little motel, and then boom, the 7.2 happens. 7.1 starts to shake, and that was tremendous. And it was fascinating. And so you see, we had 6.4. If it was under LA, directly under LA, it would have been devastating. But it was far, far away in the desert. There was some damage. Some people lost their homes. So it's not like there was no consequence. But in terms of massive scale, and then the 7.2, almost just very close to it, was really something interesting to be there and take the measurements right away. And it was very interesting, but it was very distressing for the people. So while we were excited for the data, the people around us were freaking out. I mean, I gave so many hugs at night. People crying, and this lady comes to me, she's shaking. Is it safe for me to drive? Is it? And she was like, she wanted to get out of there. No, it's not safe for you to drive. It's not because of the earthquakes, because you need to calm down. Once you calm down in a couple hours, you can drive. So it was, yeah. So sometimes, you can have two relatively big ones back to back. It happens. It happens because you have adjustments of one fault, it triggers something else. So they're complex systems. It's very complex. Yeah. So.
And maybe like one last question that just came up to me, like if you're looking at the how much is known about the large tectonic plate structures? Because I remember even when I was in school, I learned about that, and I can't even remember the names of the plates. But is this something that is sort of like, I guess there's still a lot of research being done on that, and probably a lot of refinement in what these structures really are like, or what we think they're like nowadays. What about the oceans? Like, what do we know? What do we know about the activity under the oceans?
Again, we can detect things from around the globe, right?
Yeah,
so we can see that. So that's the advantage of different types of remote sensing, whether on land or in satellites and so on. I think that the tectonic plates are known, but with all this geodesy and all that, and seeing the motion, we learn there's always refinements, but you start to learn interactions. Maybe there's a little bit more rotation in one of them, and so on. So there's more. And now that we have the ability to measure things, we get to know more about that, and that's a whole field of study in itself. So it's like anything else. There's always so much to learn, and then somebody comes with a clever idea to try to replicate that at a scale we can deal with. And then you test the models against reality. Always you need that back and forth, that validation, because a model without data is well, maybe it's a piece of art. It's a model, exactly. And we are, there's a saying, and now I don't remember the name of it. It escapes me, but it'll come back. But all models are wrong, but some are useful. Is this something that you always keep in mind? And you cannot be too oh, my model's the best. Well, today yes, but yeah, maybe not so much. So, yeah. So no, it's an interesting field. And but then again, I think I personally, because of the wide range of interests, I could be doing anything and be engaged in it. You know, this is fun for me because it keeps being stimulating. But if money was no object, I would switch careers more often, even though I've switched a lot already, just because it keeps it fresh. And but the aspect of the creativity is missing for me. So the more the stuff that's more purely creative and not scientific is a big component that you have completely covered with your activities. You know, that's what you do. That's
really...
so
you were talking about this, like, and you are, you know, like here.
Yeah, the pleasure right here.
The pleasure right there.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I know what you're talking about.
It's just you're in the zone, and it's just
it's in the zone. Yeah, it's can you describe it even better?
I'm not sure. It's just it's, well, I've called that a braingasm. It's like
braingasm, yeah.
That's kind of what it is, you know. And I've had that for the first time in math. I remember I was taking my 8th class of math in college, and then suddenly all the different concepts of all these advanced math courses just converge, and I was like, oh, yeah, it's almost like ecstasy right there. And if I listen to music, and especially complicated music, like all the prog rock and what you guys do, is just, I pay attention to everything, and it requires so much attention. It's meditative, but it's very demanding, and it's so rewarding because you can catch all the tracks all at once. And there's just this, it's a pleasure that's hard to describe, I think. And so in a way I'm hedonistic, but not in the way of somebody who takes drugs or do, you know, I love pleasure, but the intellectual joy of music, of processing it, and you play it, it's even better, but it's just such a strong thing, you know. So yeah, I'm not sure how to describe it.
No, it's, I mean, I totally, obviously, like, at least on the music side, I totally get it. And for me, it's this, the greatest composers, let's say, they sort of like have this way to present you with something that feels totally organic, and feels totally like it's been there all along, right? All the time. But then they put like these different things in context, and you realize that there was like a bigger plan. That there, if you know what I mean, like so. And this is what I love about music, like when things sort of like, you know, you're being presented with these ideas, these themes, like whatever, and then they kind of like culminate and they come together, and you realize, okay, there's like, this is like real organic creativity, but it is also intellectual, as you were saying at the beginning of our conversation. So it's like it basically brings all the centers, you know, the head, the hands, and the heart, sort of like together in one piece of art, right? And in one experience.
And you listen to it, and it feels natural. Yet it's so complex, but there's so much work. So everything that looks natural requires so much work in the background. People don't see that. And again, when I was you know, a stage technician. People say, oh, the show was great. And you know how much it was a freaking nightmare to get there. But that's because there's so much work. And the creative process, there's that too. What fascinates me, it always found very difficult when I was playing just for myself, because I really just played for myself, mostly a couple shows with friends, but is the idea of where do you stop the creation? And I see you doing so many different things. How do you kind of have to limit yourself to be able to finish a piece, or to, there's just, it's endless possibilities,
Yes.
right? And to me, this is something I admire in musicians who produce things and they're done. How can you say it's done? Because it's ever evolving, and you could do the same basic, say you could take one track and combine it with 20 different types of bass tracks, and and you could take, and it's infinite. And to me, the convergence to something that is, this is the piece.
Yeah.
It requires self-restraint, self-control. So the wanting to finish to get a paycheck also probably.
No, not in my case.
Okay.
There's no paycheck. I wish there was, but
yeah, no, that's the big sad part of this pandemic, is all the live stuff that is has been cut out. I mean,
but you know, you're quite right. Like, how do you know that a piece is finished, right? And obviously you don't know. And I think that, but that's a mark of a great artist to stop.
It's
right?
enough.
And I mean, this is what people who paint say, because like, if you you can spoil it, you know, like one stroke and it's spoiled, right? And one extra stroke and it's spoiled. And
and with paint you cannot go back and erase
you
that
cannot,
track.
yeah.
No, that's true. That's fascinating. I think this idea of creation is just and to me, so because we're talking about music, and one of the reasons that I didn't pursue this more, I have a good ear, there's no question about that, but for me it was the level of exposure and of vulnerability that needed to be there, that I don't find I have in science. So I'm a perfectionist. I'm really, you know, I really care about what I do, and perfectionist. But if I do something not quite right, it's not the same as doing something with music or that's completely creative. Then I'm completely exposed emotionally.
Yes.
And I think the strength of doing it in spite of this vulnerability is, it's really what fascinates me. And that's what I didn't have when I was younger, to have the guts to share the deep stuff and say, well, it's just, it's something you created. It's just so intrinsically intertwined with who you are. It takes a certain confidence, or being able to say, I don't care, but this is the thing that I find also fascinating with music, because if you want to create, it's you put your guts on the table.
Yes, exactly. And I think if I have a gift or talent at all, it's that it's true. No, it's true, because everything else I had to work hard, you know, to get there, to understand it, to do it right. But I knew I was going to do it no matter what other people were thinking or were making fun of me, even like in school when I was listening to music, you know, making fun of me for listening to symphonies, or like, you know, but I knew, okay, you don't understand, you know.
You don't get it.
You don't get it. I'll just I'll just do it. And you know, that is really like one of my talents. And you know, the funny thing is, like, I'm one of those people who, you know, have a lot of anxiety in them. So like in my stomach, I always
join the club.
There you go. And so somehow the fact that, like, I feel like I've been born with anxiety in my body sort of made me resistant criticism or to getting off my path, because some people were, you know, all they did was like all they could do was put more anxiety into me, and I
Yeah.
already knew how to deal with that. So this is sort of like one of the things I learned about me recently, that, you know, I
That's
can,
interesting. So do you think you really manage your anxiety? Do you
yeah.
block it or do you channel it to something else? I'm curious. That's very
No,
interesting.
I don't think that I channel it. I mean, but I never
Okay.
thought about it that way, though. I would
Hmm.
have to think about that twice, at least twice. But you know, like the no, I think I manage it,
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
and I think that the it was for me like, even like in I don't know how you would call that in Canada or the US, like the first 4 years of school, like I was 8 years old or so. And I remember that I was in bed, like it was a double bed, like with my brother, you know, the bottom, I was on the top, and I was, you know, like daydreaming, like before falling asleep. And I had this vision that life is like you're facing a wall, like a wall, or like a, you know, wall that you have to scale,
Hmm.
and you know, like you have the sense of like tension. Well, it's a little bit like an
Mm-hmm.
earthquake building up,
Yeah.
a bit of
Mm-hmm.
tension, right? And you kind of, you climb the wall and you get to the other side and you expect release, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
get a little bit release for a moment, but then you
And it
open your
comes
eyes
back.
and you see there's the next one. And
Mm-hmm.
I had that sort of realization when I was 8 years old or something.
Wow, that's
It
great.
was a very clear, like visual, interesting enough, because I'm not a very visual person, but that was sort of like my assessment of life at that age. that
So it's a series of challenges.
yes, exactly,
So
yeah,
it's funny because when I mentor younger people, students, and stuff, it's like, you know what? Stop seeing this as like a hurdle. This is a
yes, yeah,
challenge. It's
yeah,
a challenge. Suddenly it changes the whole outcome. It's like, oh, the worst thing has happened. No, it's a challenge. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to learn from it? And it's you're challenged. So that's
yes,
good. And so,
yes,
but I think definitely people like me, I always seek anxiety in the sense that I always seek challenges, and I think it's a driver also. And yeah, people would call that maybe ambitious. No, I just don't like being bored. So the
yes,
anxiety is part of it, and although it sometimes can be quite negative, it also is a driver, and it pushes you, and
mm,
you're constantly challenged. And I challenge myself. I don't tend to compare to others. I challenge myself against myself, and man, I'm a tough competitor.
you know, I wish it was the same for me. For me, it's a little bit more complex, I think, because
Mm,
for me, the music is the driver,
mhm.
right? It's not that I want to be challenged. It's just
Ah,
that I had to accept the challenge in order to bring the music into the world. So like,
mm,
yeah, like
okay.
if you had asked me, like, Marcus, do you ever want to be on stage, like professionally, or just like, you know, in front of people, like, I would have said no, like, because
Ah,
I knew that as a teenager, I literally had like very bad stomach aches when I had to perform in music school or something like that. So I never thought I would do it. But once my path became clear that I wanted to create music, like the way it's more
then you
about,
say I'm gonna overcome. That's
yes,
interesting.
yes. So and then it started like I had really these very specific moments in my career that I can remember in my life, where like the inner voices stopped talking to me when I was recording, for example. That was a big thing for
Oh,
me.
that's nice.
And then there was the moment when I was on stage and I realized I don't have to be able to, I don't have to hear myself. I can still function even if I'm not hearing myself. That was another step, right?
Oh,
And
that's
so
a
there
big
were,
step.
yes,
Yeah,
and there were
yeah.
all these steps sort of like that made me who I am. And like nowadays it's like I've turned at least 180 degrees, where I nowadays I enjoy being on stage more than being
Mm,
off stage, you know, in a
yeah.
way. So it's and
No,
but there you
that's
go,
really
like challenges
yeah.
and like accepting challenges, but I'm not really looking for them.
Well, and I say I look for them, but in a way, yeah, I
Mhm.
think partially I do, but it's just I don't like to know limits. And we all have limits, but when I encounter a new one, I want to overcome it because I don't want to be suffering from limits that are most likely psychological somewhere in there.
But you know, like we have identified some of your limits, right?
Yeah.
The musical instruments.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, we know how easy it would be to just you know, turn on that whatever it is, the M1 or whatever, like,
yes,
synthesizer.
I bought it when I was 16, man. I babysat so many kids. Yes,
it really is.
I bought it in '88. I mean, it cost me like $3,000. Can you imagine? I was 16. I mowed lawns. I babysat kids like crazy. I went on a bus. I went to negotiate. I bought it, brought it back. Yeah, still the same. But yeah, it's still there.
Yeah. You know, it's the funny thing is that I've always been like, for lack of a better word, a teacher, like throughout my life. And you know, that's also like the part of my psychology studies that I'm still carrying with me as a coach, you could say.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
Yeah.
So and it's turned out that a lot of people that work with me are people that are sort of like in your position, like where you have you sort of already have a career that you're successful in, and there is like this ghost from the past that is like the love for music, or the love for making art,
unachieved dreams,
unachieved dreams. And then you know, like for some people it takes just a few months to kind of like get on track. For others, it takes sometimes 10 years. Like some people I work with, it takes 10 years, but they get there. You know, they get there and they have like these huge successes in realizing their dreams. And I have to say that is really something that makes me extremely happy to get to
That's
experience.
The thing. Yeah, I agree. And this is something that I feel now I'm at a point where I don't actually quite care what people think anymore, or as much. And I think that would be a good timing. And unfortunately, I have a very, very demanding job and I don't have time. So if I can invest properly my money and retire early, I always said that once I retire or something, I'll play more music. I'd like to help and maybe direct community theater, do these things and so on. But I get it what you're saying about teaching, because that's the one thing I did like about teaching. I taught a graduate course for several years, and enabling capacity in other people, whether it's music or science, is something that you give them the tools, and in the end, the learning they do. You support it and you provide input and all that. But this is such a beautiful thing to see somebody who gets it, you know, and this sparkle in the eye, and you know that you've enabled something for someone. You were a catalyst for that. It's their learning, but it's really fascinating, and I'm sure it's the same for music. It's the beauty of teaching and mentoring, enabling people realize their potential, whatever it is.
Yeah. And you know, music in itself is such a great analogy for other parts of life, as we know, we're talking about frequencies, and like so.
Absolutely.
So you know, that's why just for some people, just touching a vibrating string is such a profound experience. Because like you realize, okay, as I move my finger higher up and the string gets shorter here, and I strike it and it vibrates, it's faster. I can feel it. I can feel
and
it
if I mute it, if I mute it half, it's twice the height, and double the frequency.
Yeah. You know,
then you mix that up with physics, and it's fun.
You know, it seems so incredibly obvious, but really experiencing these fundamental laws of physics, like in with your body, as you I mean, you don't even have to play a musical instrument. You just
feel
it. You
creating
feel it,
and sound.
Yeah. So and
super cool.
Yeah.
From earthquakes back to music, and these things are related. And learning is universal.
So it seems you're pretty much like a Renaissance woman, right? And also with your, and you were saying that you, with the, when you did the rigging, that you were you were climbing, and so are sports, and is sport like
No,
no,
never really sports.
never.
No, I do swim. I love swimming because it's so cathartic. It's like flying, and you can. So swimming, yes, but sports, for sports, no, unless it was hiking to see things. But no, biking. I did a lot of biking for several years, and I haven't much lately, but did a couple centuries, and that was fun. But yeah, now it's swimming is my thing. It's just a way to, it's like flying,
It is, yeah.
Then I've invented this new thing where I have a nice Sonos system outside, and I have all my music on the server, so I don't even know which album is what anymore. I just click what I feel like. And I call that dance swim. So now I'm revealing a lot of personal stuff, but I basically put on music, and it's pretty much I'm dancing to the music. And man, I did that the last 2 days. I'm completely sore. It's an amazing workout, but it's not even swimming techniques or anything, it's just moving in the water with the music. And that's kind of an expression. And I'm never danced per se. And this is just so, and then you're one with the music also, and you go and of course, what works a lot for me for that is prog is, and I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's, I mean, yeah, a lot of Genesis, King Crimson, stuff like that. Yes, I just go into that, or bossa nova. Bossa nova is a good one too. That's more party mode.
So why is Quebec City such a center for prog?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's always been.
Was there must have been like a venue or an organ?
I think it might have been the bands that came in, like Asia, Rush. Rush was my first love. I mean, big time. And I don't know why and even for heavy metal too, what we used to call heavy metal. So I don't know why. It's a very Quebecois thing, in places where other bands just don't tour anymore. They go to Quebec and they'll be super successful. So it seems to still be the case, even though I don't live there anymore. I try usually to go back for the summer festival. I used to work there as a technician, and now I go see concerts. And there's still more rock, prog there than other places. I'm not sure why. It's maybe it's the inbreeding of Canadian people.
No. Well, I'm pretty sure there must have been some fans there that put on shows, or that made sure.
Yeah, maybe
that
a radio station
or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's kind of a unique type. The culture is diversifying now, but most people I know are I mean, my ancestor came 12 generations ago to Quebec. All my ancestors that I could track down, 16, 10, 40s, whatever. And it's very uniform. It's changing now, but uniform, white, French speaking, now there's a bit more diversity. And I was surprised a couple of years ago, last time I was there, I took the bus and I heard people speak in English. I was like, wow. Oh. What's happening, No, but that was great because I kind of learned English working in the old part of the city, the tourist part, just because I was willing to, and I tried and I learned. But yeah, so I don't know. It's a different type of people. I don't know.
And so the French Canadian community, how many people are there? Do you have any idea? I mean, I can look it up on on Wikipedia.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure anymore, but it's probably something like 7 million in Quebec, and I'd say it's a very large proportion that's French Canadian. But there's also a lot of French Canadian enclaves throughout Canada, and a lot in Alberta, people who basically live in French. And the funny thing is that there's 2 official languages in Canada, and basically if you go to any federal agency, even a post office, you're allowed to request service in French everywhere. So it's considered bilingual. But so I'm not sure anymore how many people, but I'm looking forward to go back there and visit a little bit. I miss it.
I understand. I actually went back to Germany because I missed the language. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really very interesting experience. Like if you want, I share it. I was at an airport in like Dubai or whatever, and I heard two women talk like behind me. I didn't, and they were speaking like the local dialect of where I was born, so like the German,
Yeah.
and it was the time when I heard those voices, and I have to use this because like that best describes it. It was strangely erotic
Oh,
in
that's
that moment,
funny.
like where I was talking
It
like
was home.
95% of the time I was speaking English with people, and then I was living in Austria, so I heard a lot of like the Austrian German there, which is nothing like the German that where I grew up, and then hearing that really gave me that sense of sort of like an intimacy with myself somehow, where I realized I need that. I need that back in my life. And
That's interesting.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
really interesting. So for me, I completely transitioned. I still talk funny, but I'm completely transitioned. And for the first 16 years I was here, my partner was French Canadian. He was also from Quebec, so we spoke Franglish at home.
hmm
And now I'm with an American, and I became an American 2 months ago after all these years. But I don't. Yeah, I completely switched, and there's a couple friends I talk to in French, and my family that some members are not really fluent in English. But yeah, I miss the language sometimes, but not as much as I think for you it was really important. Yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, I mean, it's a bigger story because, but of course, but it's like when you get caught between worlds, right? And then when it was also like a sign that like professionally I was talking English, right? And then I realized, okay, really all I have is professional talk. There's very little, um, not, I don't want to say that I don't have friends that I speak English with, quite the opposite, right? But it was like my profession made me, or I had to speak English all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, exactly.
And
That's the only way.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And
Hmm.
then like even, and it was also a time when I gave up on watching watching the telly, like maybe 2002 or something, right?
Mm.
So then like not having that connection with that sound somehow really started, um I started to miss it. And
So,
it was also, yeah.
so I'm curious though, to you, do you see, so it took me a while because of course each language has its own construct and it changes how you think and so on.
Yes.
So do you
Hmm.
feel it's that part that's missing or it's the familiarity or both? Because it could be that you like to express yourself in a certain way and the language is the structure that allows you to do that. So uh, do you think it's more structural or more,
Yeah,
I guess,
I have not yet returned to my proficiency in German that I used to have.
wow.
So I think what is like an advantage for me as an speaking English is that I am German, so my brain is very fast, and it can kind of I know what I'm going to say,
Hmm.
because like in the German grammar, you have to know what you're going to
Yes,
say,
yes,
because
yes,
otherwise you don't know which words to use, right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
built like that. So in German, it's pretty hard to simply start talking and not knowing what you're going to say. And
Hmm.
so that is what I have transferred over to my use of English. So even though my vocabulary is very, very limited, I feel that all the time. Like even in
It's
this
not.
comment, no, you think you may think so, but it is very limited because I'm looking for the right word all the time, right? Really all the time. But what I do is, because I know what I want to say, because my German brain
Okay, thanks of the
is kind of
structure. Yeah.
yeah, is exactly is yeah. That's why I can then find other ways, find what I or say what I want to say in a different way.
So a question then, I'm very interested by that. So when do you recall starting to translate? When I worked in Alberta, I was doing oil exploration, whatnot. Then I moved to LA and I was always kind of translating and to speak, right? But eventually I dreamt in English and I thought in English. And even though I talk funny, the processes are in English. So do you translate at all, you think, or
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. Like it's really interesting because sometimes, like when somebody asks me, "What does that mean?" I know exactly what it means in English, but I can't translate it to German. Like I have to look it up because somehow for me the cultural context in English is more, or in American English especially, is more. I know more about that than about the cultural context of German, because in German it's something that I subconsciously kind of learned as a child. But English, like I have to understand what drinking the Kool-Aid is, for example. Like I need to know what the story behind that is, for as an example.
Yeah,
right?
all the idioms and all those things.
Yes.
But okay, so I have some. I know you need to cut that short, but there's something. Okay, there's two topics that are kind of intertwined. For me, when I moved to grad school here in English and everything I'd learned was in French, I struggled with math a little bit at first. And the thing is that for me, math is anchored in a language. It's anchored in the French thinking. And even though it's its own language, it was hard and it took me a while. Now I can think in math in English, which is, but here's the thing, so just before the pandemic, I actually started to play my instruments again a little bit and I enjoyed it. And then I thought, oh, let me look online. Maybe I'll take an online class because I'm autodidact, right? I learned all by myself. I had piano when I was a kid, 3-4 years, but I learned by myself. And I went and I was completely floored because A, B, C, D, E, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. And I was trying to explain that to my partner. And he's like, yeah, but it's the same note. No, because for me, and maybe it's also inside my brain how the visual is, but that's like relearning a different language. And I kind of got discouraged. It's really a different language. And well, I have this other thing you may have heard of, synesthesia, where my letters and all the stuff have colors and patterns and images, and music's the same. And suddenly I have to translate all that rich knowledge with all those connections into something that A, B, C, D, E, C is do, why? It's just really so frustrating. So I'm wondering, for you who played music, maybe you learned one style. I don't know. Did you learn the do, re, mi or the A, B, C?
I learned both.
Ah, well, there you go.
I learned both.
Bilingual.
Yes, but the interesting thing is that, and here I'm speaking as a teacher of music, right? I think we can use the stupid fact that humans started labeling pitches to our advantage as we learn about music, to kind of like to create a story, like literally just a story that explains to us how music works.
Ah, yes.
Right. So, for example, do, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do is easy if you spell the scale. But if you do the circle of fifth, can you do that?
That's the thing.
In solfège?
I don't know. Yeah, le solfège, yes.
Yes,
so
but if you do
do, mi, sol, do,
and so on. So it really kind of like the language we use, the labeling we use for music pretty much defines how we then work with the musical material, how we use pitches. Exactly.
But and mine is anchored in French.
Yes.
And in colors that don't match the colors in English either. So it's I have to double translate. It's really frustrating. So and then I'm like, anyways, I was okay, but you learn both, and that for me everything is anchored in French, and it's so frustrating. so maybe just
no, I think it's an advantage. It's an advantage.
Yeah.
You only need somebody to tell you the right story.
Okay. With a better story.
In that kind of like uses the language that you have available.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that was a great conversation. Yeah, like, there was no need to be nervous for me.
Well, yeah. Yeah, but it's yeah, I'm extremely flattered you even wanted to talk to me. I mean, you're just an amazing musician, and it's funny because when I went to talk to you guys with my fiance, we went to meet you guys, especially because of my background with being backstage. I never go to meet and greets. It's just I don't want
Yeah.
this superficial thing. It's not something. If I'm gonna have a connection, it has to be deeper than that. It's professional, and it's just I don't like this groupie thing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because with you guys, it was just such an intimate show. It was absolutely amazing. I was just completely floored, and you guys were just so nice and gracious and talking, and it was really nice. And again, that's not something I tend to do, but it was fantastic to get to meet you and Pat and Tony, that I've been a
Yeah.
fan for decades. So yeah, Tony, man, is the man. And
Yeah, he
then
is.
you guys playing together. I mean, that's the whole show. I had the pleasure right here. I mean, it was, and there are songs I hadn't heard because I was mostly familiar with prog noir, and everything else was new. But it's complex music, but I felt like I knew it. It was absolutely what you were describing. It was absolutely magical, and so yeah. So that was a really cool experience, really fun, and it got us to chat about various things. So
Yes.
win-win.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope I get to meet you again in the real world at some point.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Maybe at another music show.
If you guys come around anywhere, I'll work around my travel schedule to make sure that I'm there. Absolutely, that would be fantastic to see you guys. I hope you can tour again and
Yeah,
so
I hope
on.
so too. I hope so too.
Yeah.
I guess like within the next 6 to 12 months, we will know how it's going to be.
Yeah.
If and how it's going to be. Really.
Yeah. Well, we bought tickets for King Crimson this summer. They're coming here, so
Yes. Yeah.
some stuff is starting, but it's you have to fit in with all the different things.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, like I think there's like something that maybe not everybody is aware of. I guess for groups of a certain, how shall I say, just audience size, right? And if people, if venues can only take 50% of that, then some shows simply are not going to happen because like the costs are higher than So, and I'm a little bit concerned that with Stickman, we kind of like fall into that category.
You're in that range where, yes, the venue could not function if they only allow. There's smaller venues, which for the audience is fantastic. For revenue is not as great. I realize that, but the experience from the audience is so.
Yeah, I mean, I much prefer smaller places anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Okay. I'll let you
see you
get
online.
Back to work. Yes.
Yes, I need to work. Okay. Very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Christine. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.